Please welcome to the stage Ambassador Melanne Verveer, first U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues.
So wonderful to see everybody. It's such an honor for me personally, having had Madeleine as a cherished friend, and also as part of the Georgetown community and as someone who's gotten to work with her over the years, to be able to be here on this special day. You know, she was so thrilled that we at Georgetown took the issues that she had championed to another level when the Institute for Women, Peace, and Security was created here. And we were doing that through research, through student engagement, and she loved the students. You have heard that once, and I will say it again. She was happiest in the classroom. And also in all of the programming we did. She was a constant participant and really enhanced everything that anyone did here. So she was a powerhouse for good. And it's worth so much that we could gather today to understand just how much she did and what a legacy she has left behind. And now I have two introductions to make of senior U.S. diplomatic officials. You heard from some of her exes, former foreign ministers, and now we have our own present officials. First, I'm going to introduce the Honorable United States Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman. She is the first woman to hold this position, and today she is the second in command at the State Department. Earlier, she served as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. That was under Secretary Clinton. And as counselor under Secretary Albright. In addition to working closely with Madeleine at the State Department, she later became her business partner and senior counselor at Albright Stonebridge, the group, and was one of her closest friends. Prior to returning to the State Department as Deputy Secretary, she was Professor of Practice of Public Leadership, something that could be understood here, and Director of the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard. So please welcome Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman.
Hi. First of all, aren't we all just so grateful to know Melanne Verveer and all that she does for women? President DeGioia, Dean Hellman, thank you for inviting me to join you on this beautiful day in tribute to our friend Madeleine Albright in a place that she so dearly loved. It's an honor to be here with the Albright family, with my very good friend, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, with Melanne, with several of Madeleine's exes, as Melanne said, from her time as Secretary of State, with foreign ministers past and present, and of course, the most important people here, all of you students in attendance and watching online. As Melanne said, before I came back into government, I was teaching at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And so whenever I'm on a college campus or meeting with students, which I try to do every place I travel, I can feel my inner professor coming out, which is why I'm going to start by giving the students an assignment. Don't worry, it's an easy one. But I want you all, especially the young women among you, to start thinking now about what question you want to ask me and Linda. I want to make sure when that question time comes that it's the women who raise their hands first. Madeleine would have wanted it that way. Because nothing would honor the memory of our friend and your professor, Madeleine Albright, more than to make this a true symposium, an exchange of ideas, an opportunity to broaden our points of view, and to come new ways of thinking about the world. And I can tell you, dealing with the world every day, we need some new ways to think about the world. So although I'm going to share a few memories and reflections with you, and Linda's going to do the same, at the end of this, most of all, we want to hear what is on your minds, what you're thinking about, what you want to do, what you hope to see, what your ideas are. I have thought about Madeleine. I knew I was going to lose it. Nearly every day, often more than once, in the months since she died. We were close friends, colleagues, and even business partners. We did do the private sector for more than 3 decades. And I welcome my Albright Stonebridge colleagues here today. I treasured her expertise, her example, and her irrepressible spirit and wicked sense of humor. As we have watched horrors unfolding in Ukraine week after week, all at the behest of Vladimir Putin, alongside all of the other challenges in our world today, we all have had ample reason to miss her diplomatic mind, her insights into authoritarianism, and her profound commitment to democracy and freedom. But I most today want to reflect on what Madeleine meant for women and what she did for women throughout her career and her lifetime. We were a little more than 10 years apart in age, Madeleine and I, but the timing of the women's rights movement in the United States meant we had very different experiences as young women entering the world. When I graduated from college, there was never any doubt that I would go into the workforce and have my own career. Madeleine, on the other hand, was told that she could not pursue her first choice of work as a journalist because her husband was already a journalist. Husbands and wives could not work at the same newspaper, she was told, and the idea of spouses working at competing outlets was absolutely unthinkable. So Madeleine forged a different path through academia to foreign policy and democratic politics, all while raising 3 incredible daughters. Along the way, she learned how to do a thing many women still find challenging, which was to speak up, to interrupt, to make sure her opinion was heard, and not to care too much about annoying the men around her while she did it. This was by no means an easy thing to do. It still isn't. There were so few women in foreign policy. When Madeleine started working at the White House for then National Security Advisor Brzezinski, much less women, many fewer women, who had spent the last years raising a family. There were more than a few very serious people in the foreign policy establishment who looked askance at Madeleine, who called her, unfortunately for them, in the Washington Post second tier. That made her Secretary of State. Who dismissed her, who didn't take her analysis or her arguments seriously because she hadn't taken the same path that they had. They couldn't see that it was in part the diversity of Madeleine's experiences that made her such an incisive, thoughtful, empathetic analyst, and eventually leader in foreign policy. She was a refugee and an immigrant who had watched her mother rebuild their family's lives time and time again in strange lands, a daughter who watched her diplomat father's dreams of a democratic Czechoslovakia crushed not once, but twice while she was still a child. A loving mother who could not quite quiet her curious mind. So she learned Russian while nursing her premature twins to health, and then earned a PhD at Columbia. Not an easy get. But Madeleine knew she had experiences and insights and sources of strength that her doubters did not. And so she refused to let others' doubts color her outlook. She spoke up and fought for her point of view. She kept at it. And time after time, having Madeleine at the table led to better U.S. foreign policy decisions. When Madeleine went to the UN as the United States permanent representative, the first refugee and naturalized citizen to hold that seat, the 14 other permanent representatives on the Security Council were all men. A master of the one-liner, as I think you all know, she used to comment that her memoirs of her time in this institution should be called 14 Suits and a Skirt. She asked her US-UN team to organize a lunch of all the women ambassadors, thinking that with more than 180 nations, there should be at least a few dozen, and asked them to find an appropriate venue. They told her she could use her apartment. There were just 6 others. They fit around one table. Undeterred, Madeleine immediately formed the women into a caucus, of course, that they jokingly called the G7. They all adopted an open-door policy with each other. When a male colleague complained that the ambassador from tiny Liechtenstein had instant access to the United States, Madeleine suggested that he give his job to a woman. And then his nation, too, would enjoy the same benefit, which put a quick end to his griping. Madeleine may not have been the first woman to serve as UN permanent representative or even as US ambassador to the United Nations, but her determination to bring other women to the table, to elevate their views, to support their careers, and yes, to urge the men to make room, created a powerful template of leadership for all of us to follow. Teaching at Georgetown, some of you probably know from your own experience, she used role-playing simulations to get her young women students used to speaking up, to making their voices heard, to using their insights to analyze and solve foreign policy challenges. And there was a secondary benefit as well to this approach, which was to get the young men in her classes accustomed to hearing women's voices holding forth about foreign policy, to listen to them, to respect their opinions and their analysis. That's not only important to supporting the next generation of women, it's important to shaping the next generation of diplomacy. As Secretary Blinken has said many times, we want to build a Department of State that actually looks like America. And while promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is important on its own merits, it also makes us intrinsically stronger. Institutions of all kinds have more rigorous debates and make better decisions when they take into account a diversity of experiences, ideas, and perspectives. That's true at the Department of State, at the National Security Council, at the U.S. mission to the United Nations, really, in every corner of U.S. foreign policy. Because diplomacy is not just about persuasion. It's also about listening, learning, and growing. It's about remembering that no matter where you are in the world, whether you are across the table from a friend or from an adversary, you have to be able to put yourself in your counterpart's shoes, to remember that they too are human beings with their own histories, their own interests, their own points of view, even if you violently disagree with them. That's the spirit Madeleine brought to her classroom here at Georgetown, and it's a lesson I hope all of her students, all of you, will carry with you throughout your lives and your careers. After leaving government, Madeleine turned her energies, and she had a lot of energy, to many pursuits, to teaching here at Georgetown, to championing democracy around the world through the National Democratic Institute, and of course, to writing. Her first book came out in 2003, her most recent just 4 years ago. At the end of that first memoir, Madeleine rejected those who asked how she wanted to be remembered. After all, she still had 2 decades of public service ahead of her, and to borrow a phrase from President Clinton, she was determined to go out with her boots on. But Madeleine wrote the following. Hopefully I'll get through it. When the day comes, I hope people will say, I did the best with what I was given, tried to make my parents proud, served my country with all the energy I had, and took a strong stand on the side of freedom. Perhaps some will also say that I helped teach a generation of older women to stand tall and young women not to be afraid to interrupt. She did all that and more. And our world, our lives, my life, we are all better for it. Thank you.
Wendy, what a beautiful and powerful reflection on Madeleine and her legacy. And often we don't hear this perspective of Madeleine, and it was such an important one for today. And now it's my wonderful pleasure to introduce Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield. She is currently the United States Ambassador to the United Nations, the position Madeleine once held. She returned to public service in 2021 after retiring from a 35-year career in the Foreign Service. And during her distinguished tenure, she held many important posts, including Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs and Ambassador to Liberia, among so many others. Upon retirement, she joined Madeleine and became Senior Vice President at Albright Stonebridge. You can see what a bullpen that was, bringing in the best talent from the State Department. And she led the firm's Africa practice. Something else we are very proud of, she was also the inaugural Distinguished Resident Fellow in African Studies at Georgetown's Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. It is so wonderful to say, knowing what you've been going through at the Security Council. Welcome back to campus, Ambassador Linda Greenfield.
Hi, everyone. First, I have to dry my eyes. Thank you, Wendy. It's really wonderful to be back here and see everyone. President DeGioia, Dean Hellman, friends and colleagues, students. It's really an honor to be here to celebrate the life of Madeleine Corbell Albright, or MKA, as we all like to call her. And I want to particularly thank Georgetown University and the School of Foreign Service for bringing us together today. Madeleine Albright held many titles over the course of her life, and you may know a few of them. Wendy described her. She started out as an NSC staffer in government, became the U.S. representative to the United Nations, Secretary of State, and was a mother and grandmother, which are titles I know she was extraordinarily proud of. For me, one title she held was role model. I first met MKA back in the early 90s. I was a Foreign Service officer stationed in Geneva, and I'd long admired her from afar. But now she was coming back to town for a conference, and I felt her presence as soon as she entered the room. Seeing her up close and personal was truly a revelation for me. When she spoke, people listened. She was grateful, graceful, generous and strong. She was whip smart, but at the same time down to earth. I remember thinking to myself, this is what leadership looks like. This is how I want to be viewed as I move through my career in diplomacy. Little did I know, one day I would sit behind the same placard that she did at the United Nations. And one day I recall speaking to her about her G7 group. So when I arrived on the Security Council, I'm like, I'm going to do exactly what Madeleine did. I'm going to set up my G5. And I was a little sad that I only had 5 women on the Security Council, and Madeleine somehow had 7 at her time. And so I told her, I'm like, I followed in your footsteps. I set up my G5. We're working closely together. But it's a shame I only have 5 and you had 7. And she said, Linda, I had 7 across the UN. We were 1/3 of the Security Council, 5 women on the Security Council. It was extraordinary. And there were, at the time, about 60 women in the UN system. That number has dropped a little bit, but it's coming back up, and we continue to have the 5 on the Security Council, and we call ourselves the G5, and I know Madeleine was very proud of that. Of course, I wasn't the only one who held MKA up as a role model. This is a woman you heard who went from fleeing Nazi invasion and communist oppression to becoming our first female Secretary of State. She was an icon to so many. She paved a path forward for all of us. But of all the many job titles MKA held, perhaps the one she was most proud of, and you've heard it already from Wendy, she was most proud of being called Professor Albright. She was a fixture on this campus. She devoted herself to her students, and even after her health declined, she was determined to get better so that she could get back into the classroom. The classroom was like a second home for her, and it warms my heart to know that so many of her former students are here in this room today. But even more astonishing for me was that on the day she passed, many of my colleagues at the UN told me that they had been her student. We were in the General Assembly celebrating a vote on Ukraine when I was handed a note that Madeleine had passed away. And I stood up at the podium before giving my speech, and like you, Wendy, I broke down in tears in front of the world. But what happened next was that every single member of the General Assembly stood up and started their speech with memories of Madeleine. Every single one of them. And it was an extraordinary day. We were celebrating that we had defeated Russia and kicked them off the Human Rights Council, but we were also celebrating Madeleine Albright, and it made me extraordinarily proud. So she was an astonishing lady, as I said, and she has left a huge legacy for all of us. And I know that she is counting on you to carry her work forward. That should embolden and it should energize you. It should motivate you. As Madeleine once said, be authors of the history of our age. Now, if it feels like I'm putting a mountain of pressure on you, then good, because Madeleine would never have wanted you to shirk away from your responsibility to serve others. But I can also sympathize with you because I know what it feels like to try to follow in her footsteps. I understand the anxieties that come with that. As U.S. Representative to the United Nations, I constantly ask myself a simple question: what would Madeleine have done? How would she have responded to Russia's invasion of Ukraine? How would she keep the world's attention also focused on protracted conflicts in Yemen and Syria and elsewhere? And what I really want to know is, how did she stay both optimistic and realistic, kind but firm? How did she keep pushing forward no matter the obstacles, no matter how impossible things seem? And I also would ask, what pin would she be wearing today? And I mentioned to Wendy that just before she passed away, I'd been thinking, I gotta call Madeleine to see if I could borrow a pin to wear in my meetings in front of the Russians. And I missed the opportunity. I didn't make that phone call, and I regret it to this day. For so much of my adult life, Madeleine was there to answer these kinds of questions and many more. She was a phone call away when I served when I moved to New York. She was always generous with her time and her wisdom. But here's what has given me some semblance of comfort in the months since she passed. The answers to the questions of our day are actually within our reach because she spelled them out for all of us in her speeches and her books, in her courses here at Georgetown, and in the private counsel she shared with so many of us. Madeleine's legacy is infinite because it lives on in all of those she taught, all of those she mentored, and all of us she inspired. Madeleine, MK was famous for those pins she wore on her shoulder, each with a different story and symbolism. And as I've said before, I will always have her as my pin sitting on my shoulders, guiding me as we take on some of the world's most pressing challenges, whispering her wisdom as she had for so many of us. Thank you, and I look forward to today's conversation.
I'll go in the end. Well, that was an emotional wallop from the two of you, but just an extraordinary reflection. I have several questions, but I'm going to tell the students that I'm going to curtail most of them, and you can start lining up whenever you're comfortable. Women first, as
look at all those telephones.
As the Deputy Secretary suggested. So, Wendy, you talked about new ways of thinking for these times, because they are indeed crises one after another. And I think, too, as both of you mentioned, Madeleine is a refugee, living with the experience of war as a child, the disorder that it creates. She often talked about the New World disorder, having confronted so many of the kinds of things you're dealing with today in both of your positions. But I wonder how she might address some of that new thinking were she sitting here. And Wendy, I know you, in your awesome responsibilities, must be thinking about that constantly. So maybe you can give us just a sense of how we think about today and what we're up against, because the New World Order, or the International World Order as we've come to know it, is really sorely tested.
So, as I was listening to Linda and to Melanne and thinking about all of this, I kept thinking in my mind how Madeleine would describe herself as an optimist who worries a lot. And the reason I thought about that is it really was sort of the combination of hope and optimism with pragmatism and, you know, we got a lot to worry about and a lot to do. And that kept her both looking ahead while at the same time searching for solutions. She understood that the world changes. I mean, look what she lived through, what Kathy, her sister here, lived through with Nazism and communism and the Second World War. I mean, she lived the Blitz in London, the end of World War II, the blossoming of democracy, and then seeing the Cold War, and then seeing the end of the Cold War, the expansion of NATO, which she pushed very hard for, which led us in part to where we are today. In the post-Cold War era is how we are talking about today. But no one knows yet how that is going to end up. I can tell you from traveling around the world, and I know that Linda's had the same experience, most of the world wants the big powers to just stop it. They want to be able to eat a decent meal. They want to have energy. They don't want to have inflation. They want all of their children to come to the United States for school. They want to learn English. They want to have a decent life. And Madeleine understood no matter what era you live in, government has to deliver. And she would always say again and again and again, everybody here who knows her heard her say 100 times, democracy must deliver. That she understood that after the downfall of the Soviet Union, that she understood why Putin came to power, because people wanted to eat more than they wanted to vote. If they couldn't eat, if they couldn't feel their lives were secure, what did the vote matter? What did the vote matter? And so at a time when democracy is enormously challenged, even in our own country, and we have to be very humble about that, I urge everyone here, I've just started to watch The U.S. and the Holocaust by Ken Burns, and just watch it to understand how much of what happened in the rest of the world, some of it came from how we were dealing with African Americans in our own country, from our own Jim Crow laws. So she understood all of these connections, and so what I think we have to do, to answer your question and stop talking, is to understand those connections and to understand what people want in their daily lives. She understood we have to deliver. So that's what we all have to be focused on, delivering.
And that's the challenge of democracy and democratic leaders today as well. Linda, Madeleine didn't have an easy time at the UN. She was dealing with those disorders that she talked about as Bosnia and Somalia and the Rwandan genocide. But my gosh, today it just seems so much harder in every way. Lots of questions about how does the UN function with the veto power constantly being abused, I won't say used, abused by certain parties. And we've been watching what you've been going through in the Security Council, literally day after day. What is the potential for progress, for effectiveness? Where do we go? Because the UN has to work.
And I say that every time I'm asked this question. The UN is all we have, and if we didn't have it, we would create it. So we have to make it work. We have to make it fit for purpose to deal with the crises that we are dealing with today. I gave a speech in San Francisco, maybe a month ago now, where I talked about UN reforms. We have to have a UN that's more diverse. So that means we need to look at how we expand the Security Council and bring other voices in from the South. The President noted in his speech to the UN that we need to open up possibilities for Africa, for Latin America, for the Caribbean, as well as other countries that we know ought to be part of this institution. We have to make the UN more transparent. And recently, Liechtenstein actually introduced a resolution. We co-sponsored the resolution with them, calling for every permanent member of the Security Council who used their veto to come into the General Assembly and explain why we felt we had to use that veto. And that's pretty extraordinary. I'm dreading the moment that I have to go and explain. But I have loved seeing my Russian and Chinese colleagues have to stand before the Security Council and explain why they felt they needed to use their veto power. We have to engage with everyone. So I find I have very long days because there's no country too small for me to meet with. So I know that the President and Secretary are meeting with the Pacific Island states. I meet with them all the time, and I can tell you how much they appreciate it. So if we're going to get 141 votes like we did when we condemned Russia in the General Assembly, the only way to get those votes is have people feel like you appreciate them. So that's how we make this very convoluted organization that we call the United Nations work. We work by opening up, we work by transparency, and we work through partnership.
And you're doing a great job.
Totally.
So we have quite a line.
Of
we
women.
have a limited amount of time, but we're going to start. So be as quick to the question as you can be, and just tell us who you are and what school you're in.
Okay, I'll try. Hi, my name is LJ Dustheimer. I am an MSFS student. There have only been 17 openly LGBTQ ambassadors to serve in countries for the United States, of which only 6 were career foreign service, 1 was a person of color, and there have been no women. Do you believe that appointing an LGBTQ plus ambassador is a political decision? And will we ever see an openly LGBTQ ambassador appointed to a country that actively persecutes LGBTQ persons? Thank you.
It's a great question. Increasing diversity doesn't mean just the gender and race and ethnicity or accessibility in terms of those who are challenged disabilities. It absolutely means LGBTQI+. Every place I have traveled in the world, pretty much, I've met with the LGBTQI+ community. Sometimes it has been with people who are very proud of what they're doing in societies that recognize their importance. In other places, it has been in the ambassador's residence where we have quietly brought people in. They cannot be known to be there. They are putting their lives literally at risk to make sure that we continue to move forward for their rights. So I want to say, as important as I believe it is to make sure that LGBTQI+ individuals at the State Department, civil service and foreign service get to be promoted, get to be ambassadors, get to represent us around the world, that we have same-sex accreditation to make sure that people who are partners with each other are accredited and have immunity in a country. We do all of that. It is a responsibility for every single one of us, whether we ourselves may be cisgender or may be transgender or may think of ourselves in some other way. So I applaud your question. We absolutely must do all of that. There are many more ambassadors who privately identify as LGBTQI+ than are public about it, for their own choices or for the country in which they serve. I think that will change over time. I see change happening. Cuba just approved same-sex marriage. Cuba. So we are making progress, a lot of work more to go.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Sylvia. I'm in the SFS. My question is, what advice would you give to young women who want to enter the international field to enact change in humanitarian issues that aren't given the priority that they deserve?
Linda, let's start with you.
You should start with you.
I will do that because that's what I did most of my career, working on humanitarian issues. And what I would say to you is find your niche and just go into that niche. As a Foreign Service officer, I was discouraged from focusing on humanitarian. So I did my first assignment and I loved it so much, I decided to take a second. And I was told it was going to be a career buster. I took a third,
Jeez.
and I was reminded that my career would end very quickly. I took a fourth, and I was reminded that I would never get promoted into the senior foreign service. And as a senior foreign service officer, I became a deputy assistant secretary in the Office of Population, Refugees, and Migrations. I took 5 assignments. So go for it.
And a great assistant secretary you were.
Yes.
And now with all of the Afghan issues and other issues, we're always saying, what would Linda do? Please.
Hi, my name is Channing. I'm a 4th-year student in the School of Foreign Service and also a 1st-year student in the Security Studies program. Thank you so much for being here. My question is a little bit two-pronged. We heard some lovely stories in the former panel of challenges that our guests, our former foreign minister guests had faced in their careers early on. I'm hoping that time has really changed and, you know, our female, that ambassador, you are not asked to bring coffee. So I'm wondering, what are some challenges that you're facing currently as a woman? And what advice do you have for our male colleagues to support women moving forward? Thank you so much.
Well, first, to our male colleagues, you have to own this as well. I hope that whenever you walk into a room filled with only men, and particularly if it's a room filled with only white men, that you feel uncomfortable and you take on the responsibility to change that, because we as women can't do it by ourselves. We have to have the support of our male colleagues as well to bring about change, and so many have supported that. And then for women, for me, I had kind of a two-pronged issue. I was a woman and I was black. I am a woman and I am black. Forgot that. And that's important. I didn't intend to say I forgot it, but sometimes you do have to forget it. Own your room. So when I walk into a room, I'm not walking into a room as a black woman. I'm walking into the room as the permanent representative of the United States of America. And people better understand that that's who I am. Can I do a photo for that?
So one of the earliest pieces of advice that Madeleine Albright ever gave me is exactly what Linda just testified to. And she learned this when she was UN ambassador and sat behind a sign that said the United States of America. She said, Wendy, when you walk into a room, you're less a woman or Wendy Sherman or a Jewish American or white. You are the United States of America, and that comes with a lot of power, and you need to learn how to use it wisely. And I think I have. The one other thing I would say is I'm now 73 years old. And that gives me an enormous amount of liberty. And I use it. A delegation recently came in from another country. I'm not going to say which country because I don't want to embarrass anyone. And it was all men. And my side of the table, out of 5 people, had 3 women. And I knew my counterpart pretty well. So I teased him. I said, great to see you, and next time, I want your delegation to look like mine. So It is each of our responsibility in whatever role we have, wherever we are, whatever we do, to bring consciousness about whatever needs consciousness. And gender is one of those things, race, ethnicity, disability, LGBTQI+, all of the things that may create difference. We have a responsibility to bring consciousness.
You know, I remember so well that when President Clinton was considering who he was going to name as Secretary of State, one of the criticisms from others who were competing for the position was, well, how is she going to be accepted in the Middle East? Nobody will deal with her. And she said, I will be representing the United States of America, and if they want to talk to the United States of America, they'll be dealing with me. End of story.
Absolutely.
Next.
Hi there. My name is Zach. I'm a junior in the School of Foreign Service. My question relates to sort of geopolitics generally. It seems to me that there has been an increasing amount of sectionalism and factionalism amongst the international community. I think that the war in Ukraine has demonstrated that, with some nations riding on the coattails of Russia and China when it came to abstaining from UN votes on the issue, for instance. And so I guess my question is, do you think that forging consensus amongst nations is more or less challenging since the time when Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State?
You know, I think, and I can't speak for what it was like during her period, but I find it extraordinarily challenging because there are so many factors that come into play that weren't there before. So this, the use of social media, the use of misinformation, the pressure that countries are put under in real time. So having our colleagues get threatening text messages while they're sitting at the table, that you either abstain or be absent from the room, or we will hold it against you. And so I know I don't blame our colleagues who make the decision, many of them, to abstain, because I know the threats that they are under. And so what we have to do a better job of is making sure we give them choices that allow them to make the right decisions. So that has been extraordinarily challenging. It's a whole of government effort. It's not just me. It's me calling Wendy saying, I need you to call this country's capital because the PR is being intimidated by our Russian colleagues. So it really is challenging, but we can do all of that in real time, and those challenges are also opportunities, because in the past we would have to try to put in a phone call. Now we're all on each other's cell phones, we WhatsApp, and we can get a call through in real time to a foreign minister to say, I need you to instruct your PR to do the right thing.
We've reached the point where we're out of time, but here's what we're going to do. We'll take 2 questions more, but each of you ask your question, and then we'll wait for the answers after the 2 questions. So first question.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I'm a first year in the School of Foreign Service. My question was just about, as someone who has family in Iran and is also Iranian herself, I just wanted to know, like, what is some advice that you would give to women, not just in Iran, but in countries in which their rights and freedoms are being stripped away from them, and how can nations make any sort of progress in such an extreme situation like those?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eva. I'm a first-year student in the SFS. And my question was, how do you see the increase in number of women, as you mentioned, from Madeleine's G7 to your currently G5 only in the Security Council, impact the way resolutions are created and passed?
Very interesting. Good questions.
So can I start with the young Iranian colleague? My first piece of advice is talk to Melanne Verveer, who has helped to encourage women's leadership and women's rights all around the world. For as long as I have known Melanne, this has been a journey of her heart, truly, and knows how to do this almost everywhere. The protests that are going on right now in Iran are extraordinary. Painfully, as you probably know better than I will, they will likely be put down because the oppression is quite tremendous. But their voices are being heard. Over time, they will not be stilled. They will and are breaking through to the world. The one thing about social media is that there are many ways to find your way to it, even when governments tell you you can't have it and shut down the internet. There are ways to get through anyway. And because of that, people see how other people live around the world, and they want the same things. And so I do believe what Madeleine believed, which is that over time, one way or another, people will fight their way to freedom.
Can I just add 1 second on Iran? Check the Institute website. We've got a number of materials up and a call to action. And I met with some Iranian in exile yesterday, and they said what is remarkable about this protest movement, it is mostly the young people, and men are protesting with the women. And that is a big change.
And just if I can comment on that as well, that they appreciate knowing that they're being supported around the world. They know that we are supporting them, and that gives them courage. But I agree with Wendy that at some point this violent regime will put this down. Women will die. You know, it really does make me feel almost powerless to know that we can't just reach out and put our hands on them and help them. You asked about how women can be effective in the UN. On issues related to women, peace, and security, every single woman, regardless of what country they're from, they've all expressed an interest in making sure that we address women, peace, and security issues in the Security Council on every issue we're engaged in. And sometimes the men will do it, but you can't always depend on them to do it. You can depend on the women to always look out for those kinds of issues because we know it's truly important.
Let's thank these two remarkable and effective and dedicated public servants. That was amazing. So teary-eyed.